everybody, it's Patrick from Patrick & Friends Music Company, and today we're going to break down the blues and learn what a blues form is. We're going to be taking a very beginner approach to this, and we're not going to go in depth into the music theory. So if you're a beginning guitarist, this is a great lesson for you. We're going to be using a blues song we learned in our last video. We're going to break it down, learn what makes this song a blues, and then use that to learn about the blues form in general. If you want a detailed explanation on how to play that blues, I'll include a link in the description below and above for you to check it out. All right, let's get right to it. Let's start learning about our blues. There's a lot of different variations on the blues out there, whether it's blues forms or chords, but in this video, we're going to learn a very standard 12-bar blues form. Now, you'll see as you go along and learn more and more about the blues that they all hold the same key principles, so if you learn this one, you can translate that to your other blues forms. So let's start learning about our blues song from our last video. If you haven't checked that video out, or maybe you're just not familiar with it, or you just need a recap, I'm gonna play through it once just to get you familiar with it. 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's pop up the tabs and break down this song. So this song is built on 3 riffs. Our first riff starting on the low E string, our second riff starting on the A string, and our third riff starting on the 2nd fret of our A string. Also, you may notice that if you watched the last video, I changed up the last measure a little bit for this. We're just gonna play one note, and that's the 2nd fret of our A string. This is just to make it a little simpler for us to understand in this video. The order of these riffs and how long they go for is very, very important. So let's talk about that. So our first riff, starting on our low E string, happens 4 times. So it goes for 4 measures. Each riff gets 1 measure. So then we go to our second riff for 2 measures. So it repeats twice. Then we go back to our first riff for 2 more measures, repeating it twice. Then we go to our last riff, starting on the 2nd fret of the A string. Play that once, go back to your second riff on the A string, and then go back to your first riff off the low E string, and then we hold out that last note on the 2nd fret of our A string for our last measure. And the reason why we're talking about how long they go for and the order is because what makes this a blues is the way it follows the blues chord progression. So with a certain chord goes a certain riff. Now to figure out what this chord progression is, we have to look at our bass notes. And the bass notes are just the notes a bass player would be playing along with you if you had a bass player accompanying you. And for this, it's actually pretty easy to figure it out. So the way to figure this out is to just eliminate all the notes except for the first note each measure or the first note of each riff. So if we do that, we have our open E string, and this is our E note. So whenever we have an open E string, it's the note E, and we have that 4 times, so for 4 measures. Then we go to our open A string, which is our A note, and that happens for 2 measures, so it happens 2 times. Then we go back to our E, play that 2 times. Then we go to the 2nd fret of our A string. This note is called B, so we're gonna refer to it as B. And then we go to our A note for a measure, and then we go to our E, back to our B. So this bass movement is what we're gonna build our chord progression on. And this is the guts of our blues form. With this bass movement and the chords across these 12 bars, that is what makes up our blues form. Now, the chords just go with the bass notes. So our E bass note is gonna be our E chord, our A bass note is gonna be our A chord, our B bass note is gonna be our B chord. Now you may be wondering, what chord is it, right? E chord, A chord, B chord, that doesn't really mean much by itself. Now there's a lot of different types of blueses, so there's minor blueses, jazz blueses, rock blueses, major blueses, there's a bunch of different ones. And each of these might have slightly different chord qualities, so minor chords, major chords, and so on. What we're gonna do in this video is go over a very general and common chord to use, which is our dominant seventh chords. So for instance, our E chord is gonna be E dominant 7. A chord is gonna be A dominant 7, and our B chord is gonna be B dominant 7. And these are also referred to as E7, A7, and B7. So if you don't know your dominant seventh chords yet, that's okay. I'm gonna include chord charts as we go along, and also I'll have the chord charts in the lesson recap PDF in the description below, where it's all in one place for you to check out. Now, if these are a little too hard, you can use your major chords if you can't get these chords down. And also, I know that B chord can be tricky. If you just want to play your B note instead, your B bass note instead, that's okay for now. Okay, so let's look at our progression now. So now we have E7. And that's going to happen for 4 bars. So it's going to happen for the first 4 bars. Then we have our A7. That's going to happen for the next 2 bars. Then we go back to our E7. And again, that's going to happen for 2 bars. And then we're going to go to our B7 for 1 bar, our A7 for the next bar, and back to E7 for 1 bar, and then finally our B7 to end it. So all we did is substitute the chords for the bass notes. Now let's see what this sounds like together. So what we're going to do is we're going to play 1 chord for a measure. So our E7 chord, we're going to play it 4 times, and we're going to hold it out 1, 2, 3, 4 for the full 4 beats for each measure. So no real strumming pattern while we go through this. Okay, so let's try it. 1, 2, 3, 4. To your A7. Back to your E7. To your B7. To your A7. Back to your E. Finally to your B. And if you want to end the song, you can either end it back to your E7, or if you're going back to the top, obviously you just repeat the form. So now we got our chord progression down, we can see how our riffs relate back to our blues chord progression. So our first riff goes with our E7, our second riff goes with our A7, and our third riff goes with our B7 along with our last measure. So you see how the chord progression and the riffs that follow it make up our blues form. But you may be wondering, how do I translate this to other keys? I'm not always just going to be playing this one song. How do I play it in other keys and with other songs? In order to do this, we have to understand the Roman numerals and numbering system that goes with our chords. So our E7 is going to be our 1 or our 1-7 chord. Our A7 is going to be our 4 or our 4-7 chord. And our B7 is going to be our 5 or our 5-7 chord. Now, what these numbers refer to is the chord placement within a key. So we're in the key of E, whether you look at it as E mixolydian or E major, doesn't really matter. But in these keys, our first note is E. So it's the key of E, first note's E. And that means that our first chord is going to be an E chord. Then if you go up to the 4th note of the key, it's an A note. And that means that our 4 chord is going to be an A chord or an A7. And then if you go up to the next note, to the 5th note, it's a B, and that means that our 5th chord is going to be a 5 chord or a B7 chord. If we go back to our chord progression and we put the Roman numerals and the numbers in for the chords, we have 4 bars of 1, then we have 2 bars of our 4, back to 2 bars of our 1, then we have 1 bar of our 5, 1 bar of our 4, 1 bar of our 1, and then our last bar of our 5. So why this is so useful is because you can translate this to any key you want. So all you have to do is figure out what your 1 chord is, your 4 chord is, and your 5 chord is. And you can do this getting your bass notes down. So for instance, in the key of G, our 1 or our 1-7 chord is G. Our 4 chord is C or C7, and our 5 chord is D or D7. So if you just substitute these chords and play through your progression following this 1, 4, 5, you have your blues in the key of G. So like I said again, this can translate to any key. So now if you get down this form in these terms of these Roman numerals and numbers, you can play your blues. Say you don't have a great grasp on music theory and it's a little hard for you to figure out what the 1, 4, 5 chord is. There's two things you can do. The first thing, look it up on Google. I know it sounds simple, but honestly, if you look up any key on Google, they'll give you the notes. You look at the first note, the fourth note, and the fifth note, and there's your chords. Also, if you type in 1, 4, 5 progression, I'm sure you can look it up and they'll tell you your 1 chord, 4 chord, and your 5 chord. But the second thing to do, and this can really help you, is to just look at the fingerboard and understand the concepts. So what I mean, let's go all the way back to our bass movement, right? So we figured out our bass notes earlier. And when we did that, we started with our E notes, which is our open string. So it's our 0 fret. Then we went to our next string and played the same fret. We played an open A string, our 0 fret. Then to get to our next note, we went to 2 frets up to the second fret of the A string to get to your last note. And this is our 1, our 4, and our 5. So you can translate this across the fretboard without having to figure out the notes in the key. So what I mean by that is, let's move everything up a fret. So let's start on the first fret as our 1. So first fret of the low E string as your 1. Then our next step would be to move to the A string, our next string, stay in the same fret. That's your 4. Then all you gotta do is go up 2 frets. You have your 5. So you got your bass notes, and all you gotta do is figure out your chords from there. And again, this translates anywhere on the fretboard. So 1, 4, 5. It also works going across a couple of other strings. So if you go from your A string, and you start that as your 1, then you can go to the D string, same fret as your 4, up 2 frets to your 5. This also works going from the D to the G. Now, the one time where this may change is if you want to go back down. So say you start on your A string, and you want to do your next bass note or your next chord on your E string. To get there, you're going to start on any fret on your A string. So say we're going to start on our 5th fret. To get to your 4 chord, you have to go back down the scale or the key. So what you would do is you would go to your low E string and go down 2 frets. And that's your 4. So that's where you're going to build your 4 chord off of. Then you go up 2 more frets, just like we did earlier, and you have your 5. And then you go back to your 1. So if you started on your 5th fret of your A string, it would be 5th fret 1, 3rd fret on the low E string 4, 5th fret on the low E string 5. Back to 1. Again, this translates anywhere you go across the fretboard. 1, 4, 5, 1. So if you can get that down and visualize it on the fretboard, it can really, really help you without having to go through all of the music theory to get there. To recap, our blues form is built on this 12-bar progression, using the 1, 4, and 5 chords. Now, like I said, you can translate this to any key, and you can use a bunch of different chord types and chord qualities with it, but this progression is the essentials of our blues form. Now, if you really enjoyed this video and our other videos on the Patrick & Friends Music Company channel, make sure you check out our Patreon page for exclusive content not available on YouTube. There will be a link in the description down below. Awesome. Now, this was a lot of information, and it may take you some time to digest all of this. But if you get this down, you can get a really good understanding of your blues and blues form. Again, you can dive deep into the music theory behind this, but I suggest getting these concepts down on your guitar first. There's a lot of other elements of the blues. It's not just the blues form. This includes style, tone, technique, note choice, and so on. But understanding your blues form gives you a really good jumping off point to start learning your blues. What I suggest doing is when you're listening to music, try to hear the blues form. So whether it's in blues songs, rock songs, jazz songs, or pop songs, a lot of music is influenced by the blues. So I hope to see you in the next video, but in the meantime, happy practicing.